old must an animal have been before it could be offered and sacrificed to God? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Leviticus on walking through the Bible.
The glory of His cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Leviticus 22. We're going to be reading from verses 24 to 33. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Leviticus 22, beginning at verse 24. You shall not offer to the Lord what is bruised or crushed or torn or cut, nor shall you make any offering of them in your land. Nor from a foreigner's hand shall you offer any of these as the bread of your God, because their corruption is in them and defects are in them. They shall not be accepted on your behalf. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, When a bull or a sheep or a goat is born, it shall be 7 days with its mother, and from the 8th day and thereafter it shall be accepted as an offering made by fire to the Lord. Whether it is a cow or a ewe, do not kill both her and her young on the same day. And when you offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving to the Lord, offer it of your own free will. On the same day it shall be eaten, you shall leave none of it until the morning. I am the Lord. Therefore you shall keep my commandments and perform them. I am the Lord. You shall not profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord. In chapter 22, we've seen the fact that offerings that Israel was to offer to God would be holy. The priests weren't to offer these sacrifices nor eat their portion while they were unclean, or they would profane the sacrifice. Only certain people of the priest's household were allowed to eat of the peace offerings that the priest brought home. Of the animals themselves, the people were not to offer blemished animals to the Lord. All of this was to show Israel that God is holy and therefore must be treated as such. Those that offered to him must be holy. Those things that were offered to him must be holy. And even those who ate of his sacrifices must be holy. God would not accept anything unholy, so he gave these instructions. Coming out of verse 24, we continue along with this theme. Israel was not to offer anything to the Lord that had been bruised, crushed, torn, or cut. Bruised, crushed, and torn are fairly self-explanatory, as these would be additional blemishes that would disqualify an animal from being sacrificed. What is meant by the term cut? Does that mean that if an animal cuts itself, even if the cut heals, they were never to be sacrificed? Well, if that's what the word meant in this context, then the answer to that would be yes. However, what is being talked about is castration. Sometimes we do this to animals, especially domesticated pets, in order to prevent breeding. But such animals would not be allowed to be offered under the law of Moses. Why? Because this type of cutting meant that the animal was physically blemished. It wasn't functioning perfectly as God created it. It was thus unholy and could not be offered. From the phrase that immediately follows this command, that being, nor shall you make any offering of them in your land, it appears that not only did God forbid Israel from offering castrated animals to him, but God was forbidding Israel to castrate their animals, period. Why would God disallow this? Well, we're not exactly told, but one might assume two possibilities. One, that God didn't want man tampering with his creation in this regard. In Genesis 1, he created the animals to be fruitful and multiply. Animals that had been castrated couldn't reproduce, and thus Israel would have altered God's intention for animals. But a second possibility is that these animals were required for sacrifice. I don't think we truly appreciate the number of animals that were offered over the 1400 years of the law of Moses. The number is mind-boggling and would certainly have animal rights groups up in arms today. If Israel castrated their animals, then they wouldn't have the necessary numbers to make these sacrifices. Therefore, God made this restriction. This is not our law today, and such isn't repeated in the New Testament, so these instructions are not what we have to follow. Verse 25 refers to strangers that wish to offer sacrifices to God. Although we might not think this to happen often, it most likely did, as strangers in the land were common, and some might even turn away from idolatry and desire to worship the true God. The restrictions placed on Israel concerning blemish sacrifices applied to strangers as well. No blemish sacrifices would be accepted. Verses 26 and 27 contain yet another blemish that would mean an animal couldn't be offered, although this type of blemish might not have been so obvious. The blemish here is that of extreme youth. Recall earlier on in the book that certain sacrifices require that the offering be made from animals of the first year. That meant any time during the first year, that is, except an animal that was less than 1 week old. Those animals would not be accepted. However, any animal older than that would be accepted. Verse 28 gives us another example of God's mercy. A mother and her young are not to be killed on the same day. Recall from Exodus 23:19 that a kid, a goat, was not to be boiled in his mother's milk. The bond between mother and their offspring was close and was to be respected by man. Verses 29 and 30 again impress upon Israel that their peace offerings were to be voluntary, and if the peace offering was an offering of thanksgiving, it was to be eaten of the same day, following instructions found in Leviticus 7:15. All of these commandments were to be followed because God was a holy God who would be hallowed among Israel, for it was he who sanctified them and brought them up out of Egypt. This concludes the third section of Leviticus, dealing with uncleanness and its removal. The Lord willing, in the next episode, we'll move on to section 4, which deals with holy days and seasons. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Leviticus 23, verses 1 to 8, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.